Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating investigation surrounding one of the most consequential figures of our entire generation, Dr. Geoffrey Hinton. But we aren't just going to rattle off his resume. Instead, we're exploring a totally unique question. We want to know, does the extraordinary, world-changing life of the Godfather of AI actually align with his dom-snum's numerical blueprint? Let's find out by mapping his numbers directly against his historical achievements.
It's a pretty compelling thought experiment, right? Was Geoffrey Hinton's journey to revolutionizing artificial intelligence already outlined in his numbers, decades before neural networks were ever considered mainstream? To figure this out, we're going to take the hard data of his career, the milestones, the struggles, the breakthroughs, and overlay them directly onto his numerical profile. Now, we aren't here to prove numerology. We're just here to objectively investigate this incredible boundary between hard data, destiny, and hidden design.
All right, so here is our roadmap for today. 1. The Godfather of AI. 2. The numerical blueprint. 3. Charting the life graph. 4. Biography versus the numbers. And finally, 5. The final verdict.
So, let's jump right into part 1. The Godfather of AI.
Think about the sheer timeline of persistence we're dealing with here. Born in Wimbledon back in 1947, Hinton spent decades championing artificial neural networks when the mainstream computer science world was, frankly, looking entirely elsewhere. In 1986, he co-authored a highly influential paper on the backpropagation algorithm. Then, jump ahead to 2012, working with his students in a literal bedroom using graphics cards, they created AlexNet. This was a historic breakthrough in image recognition that basically kick-started the modern deep learning boom we see today. But then, fast forward to 2023. After a decade acting as a VP at Google, he suddenly quits. Why? To publicly and freely warn the world about the existential risks of the very technology he spent his entire lifetime building.
And get this, his genius isn't just some isolated random event. It's literally in his DNA, which is absolutely awe-inspiring. He comes from this incredibly distinguished British scientific dynasty. His great-great-great-grandfather was George Boole, as in the inventor of Boolean algebra, the literal foundation of modern computing. Another relative is George Everest, the Surveyor General of India, who Mount Everest is named after. And fun fact, Hinton actually carries Everest as his middle name. Add to all that a 2018 Turing Award, a 2024 Nobel Prize in Physics, and over 1 million Google citations, and you're looking at an absolute titan of modern science.
Moving right along to part 2, the numerical blueprint. Now, his dom-sims character analysis, it might actually surprise you a bit. For such a highly methodical, prestigious academic, his blueprint highlights core traits of being impatient and yet temperamental. It points out a tendency to have a big temper and to rush into conclusions and decisions too fast. For a man who spent decades painstakingly developing and tweaking neural networks, this underlying restless urgency is just a fascinating contrast to his meticulous scientific output.
Diving deeper, his profile identifies his core as 933 and his life path number as 3. In this system, that's known as young fire, or the expressor. This particular path is defined by expression and creative joy. It's driven by this undeniable burning urge to share ideas and communicate through words. I want you to keep this expressor trait in the back of your mind, because this overwhelming need to speak out is going to become absolutely crucial when we examine his most recent career decisions.
Okay, part 3, charting the life graph.
So his calculated life graph classifies him as an early bloomer. You can clearly see these distinct energy cycles mapping out seasons of preparation, peaks of maximum momentum, and then these valleys of recalibration. There's a massive, sharp peak early on, followed by some valleys, and then secondary climbs later in his life. What we want to do here is see if this mathematical map of his momentum actually matches the real-world waves of his career.
Check this out. The graph indicates a prolonged low between 1958 and 1968, so that's from ages 11 to 21. The reading describes this as a period of reduced energy and quiet pressure, specifically noting that these are the seasons that carry the hard lessons making future peaks possible. Well, historically speaking, as Hinton entered his academic studies in psychology and artificial intelligence, the whole concept of neural networks was highly unpopular. He was forming his foundational ideas during a true AI winter, facing immense skepticism from the mainstream community. The numerical quiet pressure from the graph perfectly mirrors the heavy academic resistance he had to push through in real life.
Which brings us to part 4, biography versus the numbers. This is where it gets really interesting.
First, let's test that young fire life path we talked about earlier. Remember, the numbers define him as the expressor, someone whose core lesson involves pure, sometimes impatient expression, and who literally cannot hold back from speaking their truth. Now compare that to the historical facts. In 2023, after 10 years of highly lucrative, incredibly prestigious work at Google, he abruptly resigned. And he did this specifically so he could speak freely to the media, warning humanity about the dangers of misinformation, job loss, and the true existential threat of AI. That undeniable need to express and communicate, even at immense personal and professional cost, it aligns flawlessly with the expressor numerical archetype.
But guys, here is the most staggering alignment of the whole shebang. His life graph pinpoints his absolute highest lifetime energy peak, a level 9 out of 9, arriving exactly at age 39. So what year was Geoffrey Hinton 39 years old? 1986. That is the exact same year Hinton co-authored the original Nature paper on the backpropagation algorithm. That paper is the foundational text that made deep learning computationally viable. It's literally the bedrock of the AI revolution we're living through today. His historical, paradigm-shifting scientific breakthrough happened in the exact same year his numerical life graph hit its absolute mathematical zenith. You just can't make that up.
And that leads us to Part 5, the final verdict. Geoffrey Hinton once said, "I've come to the conclusion that the kind of intelligence we're developing is very different from the intelligence we have." This is a man who spent his entire life studying the human brain in order to build artificial minds, only to realize the sheer alien power of what he had actually helped unleash. His journey required immense independent thinking, a willingness to boldly challenge accepted ideas, and just incredible persistence.
So, what does this all mean for us? Well, understanding these cycles of innovation in a life as impactful as Hinton's can actually inspire our own persistence when we're going through challenging seasons. We've seen how his profound need to speak out against AI risks beautifully reflects his expressor life path. We've seen how the years of academic pressure match his graph's low periods exactly. And we've seen how the single most important AI paper of the 20th century aligns precisely with his absolute numerical peak at age 39. Whether you view it as destiny, mere coincidence, or some hidden numerical design, Geoffrey Hinton's life presents a genuinely fascinating example of how curiosity, persistence, and visionary thinking may unfold in total harmony with the numbers. Are the blueprints of our greatest achievements already drafted before we even begin the work? It's something to think about. Thanks for exploring this with me today.